Excellent. It's working, Jeremiah.
Hooray.
Happy Sunday, everyone. We're so happy to see all of you on this beautiful Sunday. It's about 2 p.m. on November 10, 2024. We are so happy to have all of you here because we're starting another series with this time Miss Eileen Maddox and Mr. Peter Terry. We're so happy to have the both of them here. The Clearwater Baha'i community on clearwaterbahais.org is hosting these sessions and streaming to YouTube and Facebook. You're more than welcome, all of you joining us here today, to check out these series as we will be posting them weekly. They'll be online on clearwaterbahais.org so you can join yourself on Zoom. If you go to activities and events, the drop-down menu will yield various sessions. The one that we're doing is the 2 p.m. Eastern time, since we're in Florida, 2 p.m. Sunday adult class. This Sunday adult class, to find more information on the home menu, should you wish to learn more about the speakers. When you scroll down on the main page, clearwaterbahais.org, below the Sunday session that we have routinely every Sunday at 11 a.m., below that, you'll find upcoming, current, and previous seminars. The first one, about on the left side, assuming the interface is the same as what I have, you'll find the Holy Bible, the Pentateuch, Genesis to Deuteronomy. That, once you click on it on the home page, it will take you to our special page about the online talk and discussion on Sundays at 2 p.m. And furthermore, the links and to schedule on your calendar everything you need. With that being said, we want to begin with our introductions and get straight to the course, which will be coming. The series will continue over a few weeks. So we are so happy for all of you that are joining us on this first session. We have Mr. Peter Terry and Miss Eileen Maddox. To begin, Miss Eileen Maddox is an independent scholar who has shown several times amazing materials that we can look at already on clearwaterbahais.org. Several subjects about matters in the Old Testament, areas that you can start your search learning a lot more. She's written several books. Her first book, 1844, Convergence in Prophecy for Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i Faith. It explores expectations in the West of the return of Jesus Christ, and in the East of the return of the 12th Imam, the promised one. So it's a really big subject. You can find this material on Amazon or perhaps your local bookstore. Miss Eileen Maddox, of course, has written several other books. These subjects are covered in some of the sessions that she's shown on Clearwater Baha'is, be it on the YouTube channel or the Facebook page. With that being said, we also have Mr. Peter Terry, another Clearwater Baha'is regular. We're so happy to have him with us as well in the same session. He is a scholar, he's an author, he's a teacher, published books, just like Eileen. He's published 8 books, 4 chapters published in other people's books, and 50 papers he's written independently, available online. His principal areas of expertise are religious scripture, history, education, philosophy, theology. He's done several sessions with Clearwater Baha'is. We've gone over the Persian Bayan with Mr. Peter Terry. We've gone over the Kitabi Ikan with Mr. Peter Terry. So these sessions, just like those belonging to Eileen Maddox, are available online on Clearwater Baha'is, be it the YouTube or Facebook page. With that being said, we welcome all of you. Please schedule this in your calendar for Sundays at 2 p.m. We welcome all of you on this first inaugural session of the series. And most importantly, with Miss Eileen and Mr. Peter coming today to be on this session, we welcome both of you, our esteemed speakers. Thank you so much for being here with us today on this very beautiful Sunday. Welcome, everyone.
Amen. Welcome, everyone, to this course. You can hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. We had a long delay, but here we are, and we are excited to be here. Several years ago, I searched for a Baha'i book that would present the prophets of the Hebrew Bible in a systematic, chronological order. No such book existed, and I received the inspiration and guidance, therefore, to write it. This was late in life, after I retired, and it's been quite a job to start Bible studies this late because I was not raised with the Bible. The trilogy, The Coming of the Glory, was designed to cover all the Hebrew Bible prophets within the context of Israelite history and from a Baha'i perspective, chronologically. This course will follow the trilogy's chronology and context. Abdu'l-Baha wrote that all the texts and teachings of the Holy Testament have intrinsic spiritual meanings and are not meant to be taken literally. He also wrote that these texts and teachings are often symbolical and contain realities of spiritual meaning. Please keep that in mind as we move along. The Baha'i writings will be foundational in our presentations. Even so, Peter and I may approach the same topic from different angles, and different viewpoints may emerge. That's wonderful. And maybe you will be presenting third and fourth and 5 different viewpoints. And all of us might be right to a certain extent. Now, for the structure of each session, there is much to cover and time is limited. So live Q&A will be very limited if we get to it at all. Therefore, please put your questions in the chat box. They will mostly be answered at the beginning of the next section, like today's questions will answer at the beginning next Sunday. Peter and I are also glad to correspond by email with you and to answer questions, and our email addresses are in the chat box. This series will run for 8 weeks on Sundays from today through December 29th. Since there will be 1 week between sessions, we will also give you suggested reading to prepare for each session, and we'll give you that at the end. There are many translations of the Bible to choose from. I recommend going online to BibleGateway.com, and I'll put that in the chat box. That's Bible Gateway with the link, which I will show in chat. You can choose from about 35 English translations, and you can easily move around the biblical scriptures using this tool. And check out Bible Project. It presents, and I'll put that in the chat box too. It presents each book of the Bible in excellent cartoon graphics. But they're done very well, so don't laugh. I'll put that link in the chat box. I mentioned that this course will follow the chronology of my trilogy, The Coming of the Glory. As attendees of this series, you may order these books at 15 to 25% discount. And I'll put the links for this special offer in the chat box too. And I'll be sending out a weekly newsletter for the course. If you wish to receive it, please send me an email. My email address, as well as Peter's, is already in the chat box. And now I'll turn this over to Peter for his introduction and comments on the course.
Now I'm unmuted. Yes, well, thank you so much for kicking us off, Eileen. And I've got a few things I want to share with you. Initially, one of them is that I want to add 2 things to the chat. One of them is a link to an excellent source of information that you can access online for free, which is called Bible Hub. Okay. I highly recommend this because I use it just about every day of the week. Okay, for my own research. But now you have 3 resources. I'm going to give you a 4th. Okay. The 4th resource is called, its official name is Ocean 2.0. Okay. Okay. But Ocean 2.0 is also, it has, of course, a proper name, and its proper name as a URL is called, and this you can access from any computer, any place in the world for free, oceanlibrary.com. Okay, I'm going to put that in the chat too. Now, the principal reason why I would highly recommend to you Ocean is because it's been developed by a team of people, of which I happen to be one, to provide people with the texts of scriptures with narration. So that means as you are reading, the text and the narration are aligned. They're going at the same speed. Okay. And this is a tremendous innovation that has been made possible by the AI, the fantastic growth of online potentialities, and so I can highly recommend this one for the simple reason that listening to the Bible recited by someone with a beautiful voice while you're reading is something really special. It touches your heart as well as your mind. It's something I highly recommend to you, and because it's available for free, you don't have to have any concerns about having to pay a sort of a membership or something like that. So here it is. Here's Ocean Library. There you go. And rather than take the time to play you a sample from Ocean, I'm going to invite you to do that when the class is over. At your earliest convenience, I recommend that you just look it up and try it out for yourself. Now, what I wanted to share with you this morning briefly is are the manuscripts that have survived for the Bible. And the reason why that is an important subject is because it turns out that unlike the Baha'i writings that were written down and immediately copied and within a short period of time published in various published editions, in the case of the Torah, in the case of the Pentateuch, there's a long lapse of time. According to Jewish tradition, the Hebrew text of the written Torah was revealed in its entirety on Mount Sinai. And according to that same tradition, Moses lived between 1391 and 1271 BC. All right. So that is their tradition, is that the Hebrew text is that old. However, the oldest fragments of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, that have survived to this day have been dated for approximately the 2nd or 3rd century BC. Okay, that's the oldest ones. Okay, we don't have any fragments yet from any earlier than that. And those fragments come from the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way, which are also called the Qumran Caves in Israel, have the oldest documents, biblical documents, that have so far been discovered in the world, kept in a perfect environment for manuscripts, by the way, because it's dry and hot. Okay, so to give you an idea, when you look at those biblical manuscripts and you start looking at anything other than what is found in the Qumran caves, you're looking at AD. You're looking at the Common Era after the time of Jesus. 7th century is a very old one. When you want to find a complete manuscript of the Torah, we're talking about much later, much later. And as far as we know so far, one of them that's complete is from about the 12th century of the Common Era. Another one is from about 1000, but it's not actually complete. It's not entirely complete. Now, I want to mention a few other dates just for comparative, for your comparison. The Hebrew of Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, was found 7 copies in the Qumran caves. And the oldest one of those is dated somewhere between, they don't have the exact date, but it's somewhere between 350 and 100 BC. So you see, this is really an extraordinary thing, is that we have something that may actually precede the first manuscript of the Torah, is the book of Isaiah. The book of Isaiah was very important for the Jewish community at that time. The Samaritan Hebrew version, the earliest we have, is about 1360 of the Common Era. The oldest Greek Septuagint copy. The Septuagint is the translation of the entire Old Testament into Koine Greek, which is the common Greek of the time. And the oldest manuscripts of those are around the 300 BC, which is really quite remarkable because it was translated about the same time. And then we have the Syrian Peshitta, and that dates to about 464 of the Common Era. And the Ge'ez Torah of Ethiopia is 1360 Common Era. And the Arabic Torah, the oldest ones are from the 9th century. So that's my quick overview. It'll give you, I've got all of this in writing, and I'll make it available to you so that you can refer back to this and do further research if that interests you. And now I'm turning over the floor to Eileen. You are muted, my dear.
I'm no longer. I just unmuted. Thank you. And I'm going to hit share. And I'm going to hit my PowerPoint. And I'm going to hit.
Wow, gorgeous.
Thank you. Yes, I like it. Okay, and now we will begin. The Pentateuch Entwined. Welcome, everyone, to the Pentateuch Entwined, the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This is an introduction to the Pentateuch that I call the Pentateuch Entwined. And why? Because everything comes from something, and nothing comes out of nowhere. Why study the Bible? Why should we study the Hebrew Bible, also known as the Old Testament, when we have the revelation of Baha'u'llah? The most important answer to that question is that the central figures of the faith stated many times that we should study the Bible. God's plan for humanity can be read throughout the Hebrew Bible, as well as the New Testament, and particularly in its prophecies. Studying the Bible has actually been given to us as a mandate, as a must-do. Abdul-Baha said, "It is the religious duty of every Baha'i to read and comprehend the meanings of the Old and New Testament." and a well-known admonition from Abdu'l-Baha when he quoted Muhammad, "You must know the Old and New Testaments as the Word of God." Well, those are really clear. Shoghi Effendi explained that when Abdu'l-Baha states that we believe what is in the Bible, he means in substance, not that we believe every word of it to be taken literally, or that every word is the authentic saying of the prophet. This means that research is needed in the Baha'i writings for corroboration or explanation of biblical themes. Deep thinking is sometimes needed to pull together accurate interpretations, and the researcher must be open always to new approaches. Abdu'l-Baha also gave important guidance about how to approach the Bible when he wrote, "All the texts and teachings of the Holy Testaments have intrinsic spiritual meanings. They are not to be taken literally." But the earlier books of the Hebrew Bible, as Peter was explaining, weren't written down for a long time, or the early original writings are not available to us. So the question arises, how can they be trusted? The Universal House of Justice answered this question about trust in the Bible in a letter to an individual that states, "The Baha'is believe that God's revelation is under his care and protection, and that the essence or essential elements of what his manifestations intended to convey has been recorded and preserved in their holy books. However, as the sayings of the ancient prophets were written down sometime later, we cannot categorically state, as we do in the case of the writings of Baha'u'llah, that the words and phrases attributed to them are their exact words. So we have been assured that the essence of the sacred scriptures has been preserved. The divine protection is a mighty concept that will become evident as we move along in this course. We have a lot of territory to cover in 8 weeks. The Pentateuch starts in Genesis with creation, which Peter will cover. The Pentateuch ends with the Israelites poised to enter the promised land, the land of Canaan. Now, here's how Peter and I plan to present this course. Systematic chronology of biblical events. Systematic chronology was the motivation and the guiding force behind my trilogy, The Coming of the Glory. Divine guidance unfolds over the course of centuries. It's important to see this progression. Historical background. Historical context is vitally important. What were the times like when Isaiah was speaking and Jeremiah? We're going to find out. And who were those pesky Canaanites? Where did the Philistines come from? Why was the land of Canaan weak and depopulated when Moses' people arrived? The history of the times will be woven into the sagas and events. And the important role of symbolism to illustrate spiritual meanings. Much of the Hebrew Bible can be best understood through symbolic interpretation. The harmony of science and religion, the roles of religious faith and in particular, the science of archaeology. And I'll give one example of how the harmony of science and religion applies to biblical studies. We will cover the basics of archaeology and how archaeology study the physical evidence of ancient times. Sometimes science contradicts the probability of a biblical saga. Fear not, this usually opens the door to far more meaningful and accurate interpretations of that event. And here is one example of symbolic approach to interpretation. And this is in the Kitabi Akdas, where Baha'u'llah wrote, "Amongst the people is he whose learning hath made him proud, and who hath been debarred thereby from recognizing my name, the self-subsisting, who, when he heareth the tread of sandals following behind him, waxeth greater in his own esteem than Nimrod." And then a note in the Kitabi Akdas states, the Nimrod referred to in this verse is, in both Jewish and Islamic traditions, a king who persecuted Abraham while he was still in Ur, and whose name became symbolic of great pride. Therefore, whenever you run into a reference to Nimrod, you can keep the symbology in mind. Now, there are many misunderstandings about the Hebrew Bible, and during the course, I'd like to clear up 3 of them because they really irritate me. The Bible is just a book of myths. In a word, no. Why would the central figures of the faith have strongly encouraged the study of the Bible as the Word of God if it were just a book of myths? The reason they did is that each of the so-called myths has profound spiritual meanings, and we will examine many of them during this series. The Bible is too hard to read, let alone understand. In a word, no. Go online to Bible Gateway. The link is in the chat box, and you can choose from about 35 English translations. I use the New International Version, which is very readable in today's English. Now, I only started studying the Bible 12 or 13 years ago, so I had to start from the beginning. Take it from me, it is doable. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. A verse that is often used to delegitimize the Bible. I've heard the Bible demeaned so often by this quote. I cringe when I hear it. In a few weeks, we'll look at a comparison between the Hammurabi Code of Mesopotamia and the Mosaic codes. And you can then decide upon this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth controversy for yourself. Today, to start, I'm going to present essential historical background very quickly that set the stage for the Pentateuch series. As mentioned, the Pentateuch entwined means that everything not only emerges from something else, but goes through a period of entwinement with the past into the future. There were thousands of years of human development in the Middle East before the prophet Adam appeared, then Abraham and Moses. And it's important to be familiar with what came before in order to better understand what came later. We'll cover animism, the Neolithic Revolution, the prophet Adam, Mesopotamia, the cradle of Western civilization, the prophet Abraham, polytheism in the Near East, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, the collapse of the Bronze Age, the late Bronze Age, and the prophet Moses. Animism. Humans have worshipped aspects of nature for hundreds of thousands of years, if not longer. Animism is the worship of and communication with aspects of nature. The first archaeological evidence of animism was found in Israel in a limestone cave called Kesem Cave. Humans lived in this cave from about 420,000 years to 200,000 years ago. And the cave occupants were hunter-gatherers, and at different times, perhaps both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Evidence was found that the Kesem people were involved in an early form of bird shamanism. A 220,000-year-old swan wing bone was found where the feathers had been purposely removed, an action suggesting that the bird bone and the bird's feathers were being used for shamanic purposes. Fast forward a few 100,000 years. Here is a map to keep in mind during this series. Try to memorize it. The shaded area is the Fertile Crescent. It's a half circle. That's why it's called a crescent. And that's where rain fell and the grass grew. You go across here, and this is the Sinai Desert. The town of Ur, where Abraham was born, was down here. And then you come to the land of Sumer, southern Mesopotamia, and the famed city of Babylon. And Haran is up here. This is where Abraham stopped for a while. And Göbekli Tepe, the Paleolithic temple site that we will visit. Çatalhöyük, one of the first Neolithic revolution sites that we will visit. And Karadak, where the first evidence of domesticated grains were found. Back to Abraham. He went from Haran down to the land of Canaan. And he went to Egypt, and then he came back to the land of Canaan. Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, both Paleolithic, which basically means Stone Age. Göbekli Tepe is a monumental temple site of 22 acres that was built at the end of the last ice age by Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, Stone Age people. Partial excavations show that the site was laid out in rings with large stone monoliths inside, weighing many tons. The stone tools and other evidence found at the site showed that the circular enclosures had been built by hunter-gatherers, living off the land the way humans had for hundreds of thousands of years. Tens of thousands of animal bones that were uncovered were from wild species, not from domesticated animals, and no evidence of domesticated grain was found at the site. These monoliths had carvings of abstract symbols and animals central to people's lives, and also totemic images of power and intelligence. These carvings show a reverence for the natural world that suggests animist worship, the belief that the spiritual power of creation flows through all of creation, thus uniting humankind with the rest of creation. These monoliths had carvings of abstract symbols. But Göbekli Tepe turned that timeline upside down the transition known as the Neolithic Revolution. It used to be believed that only Neolithic peoples could have built complex temples, rituals, and organized religion after the domestication of crops and animals. But Göbekli Tepe, again, turned that timeline upside down. It appears that complex ritual and social organization developed before sentiments and agriculture. Recently, Turkey announced that 11 new hills covering similar monolithic temples have been discovered within a 100-mile radius of Göbekli Tepe. It was announced in 2023 that the site Karahan Tepe was older than Göbekli Tepe. Archaeological excavations have revealed evidence of houses and a year-round settlement there. These animist temple sites strongly suggest that a divine teacher stimulated the consciousness of these Paleolithic hunter-gatherers to express outwardly their spiritual beliefs. These teachers, whom Baha'is call manifestations of God, catalyzed human cultural and social development. The Neolithic Revolution started in the Near Middle East about 9,600 BC and spread throughout the Middle East over the next 4,500 years. This was the domestication of animals and plants. The Neolithic lifestyle spread and slowly, but gradually became the norm in the Middle East. The Neolithic Revolution was the transition from hunter-gatherer to farmer, and there was an overlap between the two groups. Paleolithic people had lived in small groups with relative equality and freedom, with lots of space to wander, while Neolithic farmers lived in settlements and developed social and economic hierarchies. Domestication of plants and animals resulted in a lot more work, a poorer diet, diseases that developed from domesticated animals, and a significant loss of height and longevity that has been proven by archaeologists who have examined the skeletons. Was this change really progress? Why farm? Why give up the 20-hour work week and the fun of hunting in order to toil in the sun? Why work harder for food, less nutritious, and a supply more capricious? Why invite famine, plague, pestilence, and crowded living conditions? Why? Because the hunter-gatherer lifestyle was too limited for humanity's potential and destiny to develop for spiritual and cultural growth. And because, as Abdul Baha said, change is a necessary quality and an essential attribute of this world, and of time and place. Now, here's a map that I love. It shows the spread of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. The darkest green area, which I'm pointing out with my red dot, was the earliest, and it's right down here in the land of Canaan. Although this says Israel, and it goes up. This was mostly Canaanite area. And the lighter green areas, such as here and here, developed in the Neolithic Revolution later. And it was here in the land of Canaan that was the first to develop domesticated plants and animals. The Near East also had the first three manifestations of God that we know of: Adam, Abraham, and Moses. Then Zoroaster, Jesus, and Mohammed. One Neolithic town was Karahoyak in today's Turkey, inhabited from about 7,500 to 5,500 BC. 3,000 to 8,000 people lived in crowded, unhygienic conditions. There were no alleys between the buildings. Homes were accessed through holes in the roof and ladders. The roofs were the traffic ways. It must have been very noisy. Livestock pens were just outside the walls. Surprisingly, Chattahoya lacked public buildings and any evidence of a priesthood. No remains of administrative centers, temples, or elite quarters have been found. Interior decorating and burial customs tell a lot about religious beliefs. Skulls, tusks, and horns of wild animals were fastened to interior walls. Perhaps the forgotten, nostalgic days of the hunt were being sanctified, reflecting an inner conflict about domesticated life and an idealization of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. How many of us fantasize about returning to the simple life in nature? And a few people actually do. It's called going off the grid. Archaeologists speculate that architecture resembles belief in a tiered cosmos, where a subterranean level is inhabited by spirits and spirit animals, an intermediate level where humans live, and the sky with its own spirits. Outside ladders were not only functional, but could have represented ascent to a higher realm. Certain persons were buried beneath platforms in homes, possibly to protect the home from negative spirits of the underground. Maybe it was ancestor veneration. The number of babies buried within the walls raises the question of child sacrifice. But at the same time, infant mortality was very high. So that doesn't prove child sacrifice. Adam. The prophet Adam appeared about 4,000 BCE, said Shoghi Effendi, probably among the Neolithic people in Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And it's important to this Pentateuch series to understand the divine seasons. That is, the cycle set in motion by the appearance of each manifestation of God. The coming of a divine teacher like Adam is the spiritual springtime of freshness and new growth. New teachings infuse the people, such as these flowers that represent that. Then comes the divine summer of fruition, the consolidation of new teachings and the maturation of spring's efforts. Inevitably, though, in time, the essence of the prophet's teachings are mostly forgotten, remembered primarily through folklore and mythology. Winter is that desolate time of perversion of the spiritual teachings, of systemic corruption and immorality. Winter is when the truths of the divine dispensation are corrupted or forgotten, and when war, materialism, gross social inequality, and other ills prevail. By 4000 BCE, the land of Mesopotamia was a land of small villages where farmers worked with crude tools and lived in huts. These may have been the people that Adam taught. And then the divine springtime. The revelation of Adam triggered a flowering and explosion of civilizational advancements, science and technology, art and culture, the magnitude and speed of which would not be seen again until recent history, when another explosion of science, technology, cultural and spiritual growth was triggered by the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Because of Adam, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers became what's called the cradle of Western civilization. This was the spiritual springtime and summer of the Adamic dispensation. Inexorably, the slide into spiritual fall and winter began. Social stratification became rigid, with three classes: the king, nobility, and priests, then a small middle class of artisans and merchants and freedmen, and slaves at the bottom. Strict social codes, like the Code of Hammurabi, were designed to maintain this social order, and we will visit the Code of Hammurabi in a few weeks. The practice of warfare accelerated greatly with chariots and other new instruments of warfare. Great empires were built on warfare, and that continues today. Humans were now domesticated into slavery and other forms of subservience, a process that is sometimes called hyperdomestication. And that has also continued to this day. The religion became polytheistic to the nth degree. We don't know what Adam taught about polytheism, but it was probably spiritual corruption and disintegration of Adam's teachings that led to the recognition of well over 2,000 deities, 4 of which are shown here. They had separate temples, and their images were lavished with every attention. Now, the purpose of the gods was to run the world, and the purpose of humans was to serve them so that they could run the world. This setup was a pragmatic quid pro quo that had little to do with spirituality. The gods were revered but feared, worshipped but not trusted. They were a force to be kept within bounds so that people could live their lives without malign interference from them. Abraham. The prophet Abraham appeared approximately 1800 BCE. Some scholars say between 2100 and 1800. I wasn't there, so I don't know. He was exiled from Ur in the south of Mesopotamia, went to Haran in the north of Mesopotamia, and in time, God told him to go west, southwest, to the land of Canaan. Who were the Canaanites? The Canaanites were descended from nomads who left the foothills of the Zagros Mountains in Iran, northern Iraq, and southeastern Turkey, and the Caucasus, and wandered into the Levant. They probably traveled as nomads over thousands of years, but settled in Canaan, where they became farmers and built cities and forts. The springtime of Abraham was probably the development of Canaanite city-states from about 1800 to 1550 BCE that featured cities with massive construction for walls, palaces, and temples, a plethora of warrior kings, more likely along the order of warlords, ruled the city-states and small areas around them, alternatively fighting the other kings and then making alliances to fight outsiders, such as the Hittites in the north and the Egyptians to the south. Like all the peoples of the Middle East, the Canaanites had many gods and goddesses. The god El was the supreme deity and father of mankind. The god Baal was the son of El and a storm god who brought rain, thunder, and lightning, essential elements for the prosperity and growth of crops. The goddess Asherah was the goddess of fertility and the wife of the god El. And here are the remains of a Canaanite temple in Lachish, Israel. The Hebrew Bible mentions the land of Canaan and the Canaanite people more than 150 times. Depictions of the Canaanites in the Bible are usually derogatory. Accurate Canaanite history has mostly been reconstructed from ancient Egyptian and Greek records and archaeological excavations, because Canaanite history, as portrayed in the Hebrew Bible, was biased to fit the perceived narrative of Israelite history. However, Canaanite society, beliefs, and deities were much the same as those of other Near East peoples of the time. Now, this is a map of the trade routes. The land of Canaan, right here, was strategically located. It was a transit point for empires and powerful kingdoms surrounding it. This simplified map of the trade routes shows how the major trade routes coming from the east, from as far away as India and China, went through Canaan. Want to trade in Egypt? Go through Canaan. Want to trade goods from Egypt to the Hittites in the north or to Mesopotamia? Go through Canaan and go up here. Want to transfer your goods onto a boat to Cyprus or other Mediterraneans? Go to Canaan and transfer over and pay the tolls. These trade routes kept the Canaanites connected with the surrounding empires and provided a window to the world. They became quite sophisticated for that reason. And this map shows in greater detail the 4 international trade routes. In brown, this trade route followed the coast. In blue, this was called the Via Maris, cut through the Jezreel Valley and went north. The King's Highway, in red, ran north-south, and where you see it in broken lines, it went through the hills of Judea and Samaria past Jerusalem. The land of Canaan became a nerve center for international trade in the known world. Collecting tolls was a financial bonanza that brought a measure of prosperity to an area that otherwise would have been limited to subsistence farming. Try to remember these 2 maps. They're very important to where we're going. The Hebrew Bible cast the people of Canaan, the Canaanites, as idolatrous people with detestable practices who tempted the Israelites away from the religion of Moses. And of course, they did do that too. But the reality was that the Canaanites were pretty much like everyone else at the time, culturally and religiously. All the cultures then were polytheistic, and human sacrifice was practiced. However, the Canaanites were probably one of the most advanced Neolithic societies of their time. They were superb engineers who built many walled cities, advanced craftsmen with masonry and metallurgy, prominent merchants with Middle Eastern empires. These were sophisticated people. The Canaanites invented a simple alphabet from which the Hebrew alphabet evolved. And the Canaanites developed scribal schools that left ample evidence of writing, largely in the form of administrative texts and merchant accounts. Oh, and here's another map. I do love maps. Unfortunately for the Canaanites, the mighty Empire of Egypt conquered Canaan about 1550 BCE and ruled it under an iron fist for about 300 to 350 years. Canaan served as a buffer between Egypt and the Hittites. The walls around Canaanite cities were knocked down. The kings and warlords of Canaan became the vassals. And the Egyptians also constructed military fortresses along the coast of Canaan and within Canaan. Remember the trade routes? They were a mighty prize for Egypt. Canaan was a revenue source for Egypt through taxes, tribute, and trade, and the Egyptians permitted few city walls in Canaan. This Egyptian governance house was located in Bet Shean in north-central Israel. Its walls have been reconstructed after archaeological excavations. The collapse of the late Bronze Age and its empires. A perfect storm of calamities was brewing. The world as it had been known for hundreds of years in the ancient Near East was going to be rolled up and a new one spread out in its stead. Does that sound familiar? A rolling disaster was coming from about 1225 to 1177 BCE. Climate change to coolness and cold brought drought and famine throughout the Mediterranean area. A series of earthquakes that destroyed or severely damaged major cities like Messini in southern Greece, Hattusis in Turkey, Ugarit, Syria, Troy in Greece, Megiddo and Jericho in Canaan. The invasion of the Sea Peoples from the west, now known as the Philistines. The collapse of the imperial and city-state central administrations. The withdrawal of Egypt from Canaan. Egypt left because it had to defend its delta area from invasions from the Sea Peoples and internal rebellions when governments collapsed, and then the mass migrations and population declines that followed. This was the first known civilizational collapse, and it did not happen all at once, of course. It took about 50 years, and it was generally finished by the year 1177. And these years saw a perfect storm of calamities, a rolling process whereby The interconnectedness between cultures and empires facilitated a domino effect of disasters that ultimately destroyed the world as it had been known. So what happened next? Oh, and I do want to point out this book by Dr. Eric Klein. He's a leading expert on the collapse, and this book, 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed, I highly recommend it. All of my material on the collapse comes from Dr. Klein, although there are other historians who do differ from him, but this is fascinating reading. Who were the Sea Peoples? They were a major culprit in the collapse. The appointed time for the coming of Moses was close, but first something catastrophic had to happen to open the way for the coming of Moses and his ministry with the Hebrew slaves in Egypt. The Sea Peoples made it possible for that to happen. They came from the west. One last map, bear with me. This map shows in red the waves of the Sea Peoples coming in from the west and how they attacked up and down the Mediterranean coast, everything in its way, and also Egypt. They came as fighting armies, pillaging and burning cities as they went. They even invaded the Hittite Empire. They invaded Canaan, captured cities along the coast, and then brought their families and settled and came to be called Philistines in the area of Philistia. 148 cities and villages have been documented as attacked or destroyed throughout the Eastern Mediterranean area by the Sea Peoples. And they also invaded Egypt twice. And although the Egyptians defeated them, they were left much weakened and no longer controlled Canaan. The population of Canaan was decimated and impoverished. And the green arrows show the mass migrations of other peoples. The world of the Middle East was on the move. The trade routes were cut off, and this impoverished the Canaanites, whose population declined by about 1/3. Moses. The appointed time for the coming of Moses was at hand. The collapse of the empires and trade routes made possible the migration of the Hebrews to the land of Canaan. It was time for a new revelation from God, as recorded in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And after the suffering in the land of Canaan, many Canaanites became a receptive population for the Mosaic disposition. And I think I'm at the end. I am at the end. And I am trying
So
to
I will
find the end.
I will segue in just a moment. I want to get a document ready, which
Okay.
which is evading me. It's running away, but I will find it.
I'm sure you will.
Oh, here it is. Here it is. So yes, so I'll it's up, and now I will. Yes, you've taken yours down. I will put mine up.
Go for it. And
Um,
I'll put on my audio freeze. Thank you.
Okay. By the way, I want to tell everybody in this who's taking this class, we're treating it really very much as a class because it's a sequence of lessons which have defined content, and that the aim here is that we're all going to learn something. And I want to tell you that Eileen and I have shared basic ideas, but we have not shared our material. And I'm psyched that that's how we've done it, because what's happening is when she's presenting, I'm learning. I don't know the stuff that she's presenting. Most of it is brand new to me. And I hope that that will also be the case with her, that a lot of the material that I'm going to be presenting will also be brand new. And so I'm going to, since I only have 2 hands rather than 4, what I wanted to do was add a little bit more content to my presentation here. But since I don't really have time to do that, I'm going to go with what I have, and I'll bring in the other material at the beginning of the next session. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring in something new is because Eileen is talking about civilizational development. And Baha'u'llah speaks to that in a number of passages of his writings. And mysteriously enough, those passages do not seem to have been written about or discussed by Baha'is. And so I think that you will find it really fascinating when I can share those with you, but I don't want you to wait. So now we're going to cover some territory which may be familiar or it may not. One of them has to do with the nature of the divine word, of the text of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, and the text of all scriptures. Towards the very end of the Kitab Yagan, Baha'u'llah makes a statement based upon a Quranic verse. The Quranic verse is found in a particular chapter of the Quran, which covers many other topics. But this verse, which is, it's Surah 3, and verse 7, speaks about there being 2 languages in which the prophets of God speak. Now, I don't mean 2 languages in the sense that the Bible has Aramaic and Hebrew. I mean 2 languages in the sense that sometimes they're speaking literally and sometimes they're speaking symbolically. And the literal interpretation is easy for anybody to understand. It's meant to be very simple and straightforward. And the major problem that people have with understanding the literal language is because it's going to introduce a requirement of the person, some action they need to take, which is unfamiliar and unwelcome. So literally they're told, you used to do, I'll give you an example. It used to be that people in the Middle East, Christians and Jews, prayed facing Jerusalem. And in the beginning of Islam, the Muslims faced Jerusalem as they were praying. And then Muhammad received a verse revealed to him that says, change the direction of prayer. And this was a huge test for a whole lot of the Muslims. And of course, it was very offensive to the Christians and the Jews, because it it was a literal verse. It was not symbolic. And the expectation is you're going to change your behavior. And why do you have to change your behavior? Because God commands you to do so. And human beings, being rather of a rascally sort, we don't really like to be told what to do, particularly when we're not being forced to do so. Now, of course, if there are commanders, if there are brutal dictators, then we're pretty good at following instructions because we know that the consequences of not doing so are very unpleasant. I mean, to say the least. So you have two languages. One is a language that's literal, the other one is symbolic. And then Baha'u'llah says, the problem with the symbolic one, there are challenges for both languages. In the case of the literal one, we're telling you to do something that's different from a previous prophet that you've been following for generations, and you don't like the change. You don't want to change, okay? But in the case of the symbolic has to be understood differently. It's not literal. The literal meaning is not what is intended. And it doesn't have just about any meaning you want to attach to it either. It has a specific, or could have a series of specific symbolic meanings. And how are you to attain to those specific metaphorical meanings? There's the rub. We'll come back to that. So Baha'u'llah talks about the symbolic language in a number of his treatises, which you can access for yourselves. One is, of course, the Kitab-i-Yagan. Another one, and I've got a list here. You have Kitab-i-Yagan, then you have the Tafsir, which means the commentary on the Surah of the Sun. There's a translation here. Another one is the Loy Kulot Tam, which is the tablet on all food. Because there are verses in the Quran that talk about the very strict kosher diet of the Jewish people. And because someone asked, Allah, what do these verses mean? 1 second, please. I have to put a hair clip on my 5-year-old. And I know that you have more patience than a 5-year-old. There you go.
Did you clip it up?
Yes, I did. Whoops, it's not working. Get your sister to do it. It's not working.
Try to clip like this.
Oh, yes. Yes, I try. I'll try one more time. And then I have to go back
Okay.
do my work here, okay?
Okay, I love you.
I love you too, baby. Bye-bye. I'll see you later. Yes. So in gleanings, at the numbered one here, I put, that's 89. That's selection 89. There's wonderful selection from a tablet that talks about the infinite meanings of the word. Here we're talking symbolic meanings, and that they require an interpreter. And in some answered questions, many of the chapters of some answered questions are devoted to Abdu'l-Baha explaining the metaphorical verses, because of course people don't know what they mean. So they're asking him. And Promulgation of Universal Peace, there's a wonderful talk, one of the very last talks that Abdu'l-Baha gave in the Finney House in New York City. It's number 137, where he's talking about the necessity for Baha'is to read the Bible, to understand the symbolic verses, and to be able to teach the faith with that awareness. Because the fact that they would understand the symbolic meanings opened up an opportunity for actually enriching the spiritual life of the Jews and Christians they were meeting, because most of those people had no idea what those verses meant. they'd been speculating about the meaning for a very long time. And most of the time, they're very far from understanding what it really meant. And Abdu'l-Baha goes much further than that, as does Baha'u'llah in the Kitab Yagan, by saying that it is principally because of the misinterpretation of the symbolic verses by the priesthood, by the rabbis and the priests and the ministers and the mullahs, that people did not recognize the new manifestation. Because the new manifestation is described in symbolic language. And the symbolic language, if you got it wrong, you won't see him. You won't recognize him. So I'm going to turn on to what seems to be a different theme, but is very closely related. In the first book of Genesis, all references to God are references to Elohim. And there's been a great deal of scholarly and religious discussion about what Elohim means and why it is a word that is in the plural form. Because we're talking about a monotheism. These are people who believe in one God. So how could they name the one God with a plural noun? So that's in the first chapter. In the second chapter, you have the introduction to a second name. And that name is spelled in Hebrew YHVH. And it's been pronounced by people transliterated, adding at vowels. But none of the ways that have been invented to pronounce it have been universally accepted. And the Jewish people have adopted the following intention, which is the name of God should never be mentioned, because it was only mentioned according to rabbinical tradition by the chief of the priests, the Kohen HaGadol, on Yom Kippur in the holiest place in the temple. That's the only time it was ever pronounced. All the rest of the time, there were these references to this most holy name of God that used euphemisms. For example, God was called Adonai, which means Lord. Okay? And God was also called Hashem, which in Hebrew means the name. Because this is the name, right? This is how you refer to the one who has a name that you're never going to pronounce. So there are all kinds of interesting interpretations about what Elohim and Adonai mean. And of course, Christians have interpreted both terms to refer to the Trinity. So they've said, well, this encompasses the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Abdu'l-Baha has a fascinating talk on the subject and some answered questions. It's number 27. And of course, this has been, that interpretation was not accepted by Jews. It was not accepted by Muslims either. And it's certainly not accepted by Baha'is because Baha'is are monotheists as well. So what do we have from Baha'u'llah is an absolutely different understanding of what Elohim and Adonai mean. Because Baha'u'llah says that we never encounter the essence of God. The essence of God is not within our ontological experience. Not only that, It's not even within the experience of the manifestations of God. None of them ever meet God. They don't know him. They do not have any contact with him. God in his essence is unknowable. So Baha'u'llah gives this extraordinary statement. He says all the references to this nameless one in the Old Testament, in other words, in the Torah, they refer to the manifestation of God. And in another quotation that's found in a tablet of Baha'u'llah written after the Kitab Yaqdas, he says that all the references to the Lord of hosts are also references to the manifestation of God. And in this case, specifically to Baha'u'llah, because Baha'u'llah is the promised Lord of hosts announced in the Torah. So this is an absolutely fascinating thing for us to consider, because it explains for us that the theology that we find in the Torah, in the Bible, is not a theology that's different from ours. It's completely aligned with ours. When it talks about the actions of God, it is not speaking about the actions of the unknowable essence. It's talking about the actions of the manifestation of God. And the manifestation of God does not just appear to us and act in this world. He acts from the other world. There's a beautiful tablet about this included in the Gleanings, where Baha'u'llah talks about the enduring influence of Jesus Christ in inspiring arts and sciences and the development of civilization. He's not talking about Jesus during his life. He's talking about Jesus now. The manifestations are powerhouses, and as such, they represent the power, the creative power of God. So I'm going to be coming back to this, of course, throughout this study, because there's so many references to Elohim and Adonai throughout these books. Because we want to keep our remarks within reasonable boundaries, I'm now going to go to the third theme of my contribution for this session, and that's to talk about creation. There's been a great deal of controversy over the question of the creation of the world, the creation of human beings, the creation of the soul, the creation of the cosmos. There are many, many different points of view about this. And Baha'u'llah states very emphatically in the Law Hikmat and in other tablets that were translated by the Guardian, so I have references there, that creation has been going on as long as God has existed. There is no beginning, and there will be no end either. God is constantly involved in the process of creation, and otherwise we couldn't call him the creator. The creator is not a creator on Sundays, and then all the other days of the week he rests, nor is he the creator on 6 days and then he rests on the 7th day. That was a concept to try to explain the way human beings need to behave, that we need to understand that we need to take a break where we focus on our worship of God rather than just working all the time, being engaged in our activity. Because, of course, because God is the eternal creator, and we are created in his image and likeness. We are eternal creators. We are constantly involved in creation. That is why we have an ever advancing civilization. That's why no matter how deep and dark and awful our downsides are, and we've had many of them throughout history, we come back and we have more things to do. One second. I have to remove
Okay.
something, this, from my daughter's hair. Yes. So he says that creation is eternal, and thereby he's going to revolutionize the way that we think about life, about the cosmos in which we live. Because rather than being so focused on, well, let's find out where it came from, we know where it came from. It came from this unknowable essence. We're never going to know God, but we know of him through the world that he has created and he's still creating. And that world is spectacular. It's absolutely, the more you study science, the more you find that the beauty, complexity, order that's involved in the world, and not just the world that we experience on Earth, but the world way out there in galaxies, way out there in black holes, that it's more complex than we can possibly imagine, and beautiful, and full of lessons. Every single thing that exists in this, we can't even call it a cosmos, because we're only witnessing the physical universe when we go out and our scientists are studying all of these phenomena. They're all physical phenomena. This is the physical world. It's what the prophets call nasut. But all of us, every single one of us is going to another realm of consciousness, which is called malakut. It's called the kingdom. Jesus talked about the kingdom. Baha'u'llah talks about the kingdom. The kingdom is another realm. We're all going there. And that realm, we talk of it as being one, but it could be infinite. We don't really know, because Baha'u'llah talks about there being infinite worlds of God. But we know that we go to another state of existence. And in that state of existence, the complexity and the beauty and the creativity is at least as advanced as what we're experiencing in this physical world. And then he says there's another world. And that other world is the world of the manifestations, because the manifestations actually have an ontological existence in a realm of reality that we never inhabit. They really are higher beings. They're not extraterrestrials, because those are just creatures that come from other parts of this universe. They come from another universe. And they come to us to teach us. So, this is something that you also get in the Baha'i writings, is an enhanced understanding of the extraordinary rank of the human being, the human soul. The human soul is so much greater, so much more noble, and has so many capacities beyond what human beings think. Even the wisest human beings have very small ideas of themselves, very little understanding of their true being, because the manifestation is the only one who really knows us. And he continues to encourage us to expand our consciousness. Why? Because we have to expand the consciousness to live the existence we're going to live. All of us have to. When we Baha'u'llah talks about when you come to the moment of death, at that moment, you could turn towards your next life, or you could turn away from it. And you might have spent your entire life believing in him, believing in God, and believing in spirituality. But then when you reach the moment of transition, you're scared, you hold back. And he says, that's why you can never judge another human being, because you don't know what's going to happen to them at the moment of death, whether they will make the transition. And that's why you have to focus on yourself, because you want to make that transition. You want to enter the next world with joy and happiness rather than with dread. and, so I think that when I was thinking about this course a couple of days ago, I realized that when I send an email to somebody and I have one topic in the email, they usually reply and they usually remember what I said. If I send it with two topics, maybe, very often, they won't pick up on the second one. They only respond to the first one. If I send them an email, which is I have not learned to write emails in the normal way. I write letters to people. Because I write letters to people, I have 10 things I want to talk to them about. And I put the 10 things, and even if I put numbers, most people do not respond to all of those things that I've sent them. You know, sometimes they'll go back and reread my letter and they'll say, oh, I forgot to say something about this one. Okay. Yeah. My point is, I don't want to say anything more today because I probably crossed the line several times, but I will take this document and I will make a copy of it and I will send it to Jeremiah and he can stick it up online so that you can be able to get this document and look up the references for yourself and think about them. And you have plenty of time. You can think about them as long as you like. But I don't want to go on because I've already covered enough material, more material than I would be able to absorb in one session, for sure. So, Eileen, is there something you would like to add for today, or are you ready to call it?
There's one more thing that I would like to do. If everybody could pull up their chat, I would like to remind everyone of what we actually have put in there. And yes, Peter, I learned an awful lot from you today. And this is really feeding our souls. Okay, first, my email address and Peter's email address. If you want to communicate with us, we'll be very glad to answer your emails. Also, if you want to get the weekly newsletter about this course, please send me an email and I will put you on the group list to receive it. Here is the information from Peter on Bible Hub. Very important and easy to remember. BibleHub.com. And here's the information on Bible Project. Very easy to remember. Link, actually, not information. BibleProject.com. It is tremendous. And my books, there are 4 of them in all. Thank you to the publisher, Wade Franson. We are offering 15 to 25% discount on my books. And you can just cut and paste these links and place an order if you would like. Oceanlibrary.com. I've got to remember that one. BibleGateway.com. That's where you can find about 35 different translations of the Bible. And I think, oh, yes. Homework, although I will just call it suggested reading for next week. If you would like, read Genesis 1 through 3. Read chapter 4 of volume 1 of The Coming of the Glory, and or Some Answered Questions by Abdul Baha. These pages 137 to 142. Peter, do you have any specific reading that you would like people to do to get ready? And I will put it in the chat.
You know, what I wanted to suggest to any of you, if you want to be able to read some of Eileen's book before the next session, I would highly recommend that you order it immediately, because it won't be able to go out in the mail until Tuesday this week. Monday's a holiday. So Monday, it won't be. So if you want to get it by Friday so that you can read it before the next session, then I would highly recommend that you go and order it immediately. And when you order it, Eileen, you should tell them how to order it so that they get this discount.
Yes, look into chat approximately in the middle or 1/3 of the way down, right under BibleProject.com. And then there is a new entry on chat. Eileen's books with 15 to 25% discount. And the first link is for book 1 only. The second link is for all 3 books in the trilogy. And the legacy offer also contains my book 1844, Convergence in Prophecy, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i Faith. So you can just click those links and go right to them. And the thing with the books is I put in a lot of details and everything is documented, Bible verses, book pages. In these PowerPoints, it's sort of a dip in, dip out, then dip into another topic, dip out, and the serious studying, well, what I do is serious, but you can take it a lot further with the books and also with Peter's papers that he'll be sharing with you. And if you have any questions, please you can post them here in chat. If they're quick questions, we can give quick answers. If they're long questions, we'll address them first thing next week. Okay, Peter?
Yes, and I would. I want to let you know that we have a long history of going to school when our teachers were not particularly accessible after class or any other time. They were available to us when we were in class, and we didn't dare to ask them questions in many cases. And if we would ask them a question, we'd have to find the right time. You'd have to make an appointment. Remember that when you went to university, you had to make an appointment to see your chemistry professor, and he had about 15 minutes for you, and no more than that, for sure. All right. We are not those sort of teachers. That's why we encourage you to send us emails, because if I'm going to give you a good answer, it might take a while for me to come up with a good answer. I will take the time. I promise you that. My commitment is anybody who writes me will get an answer, and will get an answer well before the next class, because otherwise you'll have to ask the same question twice, and who wants to do that? So I recommend that you not ask questions right now. That's all, because I think if you ask questions right now, that our already 2 hour session will become very, very long indeed, and our poor hosts won't be able to go home to their families.
Can we make a statement, not a question?
Yes, Sabine.
I just want you to
Wonderful
know.
to see you.
Nice. Thank you, Peter. I want you to know I've seen the Dead Sea Scrolls in Israel. I have talked and visited in Hawaii with one of the translators of the Dead Sea Scrolls, who were handed over from the Vatican, the papers and fragments. And when I went to the Museum of the Rock, I saw the scroll of Isaiah, and naive me took a picture of it, and they just about had a heart attack because the flashlight and the impact of the fragments, of the fragments. But I still have the picture. And so I want you to know, K4, in case you wonder what cave it was, K4, and I've been up to Qumran, and of course on the way to Masada. So thank you for bringing back that memory.
Wonderful. Good to see you. Good to see you. Wonderful. Oh, and on your wall, on Zabid's wall, she has all these people from the native peoples of Washington. Oh, how wonderful. Yes, because really, what we're talking about here is the native peoples in the Middle East and their chronicle of their lives. And here you have wonderful native peoples who are right living next door. That's wonderful. And you're celebrating their history. So, my friends, I think we should say good adieu for today, and we will see you next week. And please invite your friends and tell them it's not another fireside. It's not another fire. It's not another deepening either. This is something different. And I know that anybody who comes and joins us is going to learn a lot.
Thank you so much for all your hard work, Eileen and Peter. Just fascinating. Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you all for coming.